Construction drawings are absolutely fundamental to garden design, and as a designer, if you're not able to produce a clear and concise set of plans explaining how to build the elements within your design, then you're simply not doing your job. Yet talking to many garden designers, this seems to be one of the elements that is particularly challenging. If you're one of those people, fear not. In this video, we're going to fix that. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Neil Sutcliffe and I'm Managing Director and Lead Designer here at Creative Roots. But before I was a garden designer, I grew up and lived working, building and landscaping with my dad. So I'm very fortunate to have that construction background really to back me up. But what if you don't? Garden design is one of those careers that people often retrain into, and so you may not have had construction background before coming into it. It can be quite daunting when you tell an experienced landscaper exactly how to build something. To be honest, there's no individual book or magic silver bullet, but in this video I'm going to give you some examples of some of the construction detailing that I do that I think you are likely to need in your designs at some stage, and show you how I detail these. Then at the end of the video I'm going to be giving you some great resources that you can refer back to when you're expanding and going and designing lots of other details to come. Steps are one of those details that seem really simple often, but if you forgive the pun, can really trip you up if you get them wrong. It's also really important to design your steps, because if you don't, then chances are your landscaper is going to have to do that for you on site, which can often take quite a bit of time. The chances are they're going to want to charge the client for that. Or if they don't design them, or if they don't think about them on site enough, the results could be a bit of a disaster. So what do we need to do? Well, first of all, there are 3 key rules that I think you should follow when you design steps of any sort. The steps should all be the same height, and when working out the tread size, that's this bit here, it should be around 2.5 times the rise. Steps should never be less than 100mm or greater than 225mm. So steps of different heights can be quite dangerous, particularly when you're walking down them, but also you can trip up them as well. Steps with too small a tread can also seem steeper than they need to be, and steps that are either too short or too tall, yet again another trip hazard, or at very least can make the steps feel quite awkward to walk up and down. Remember, we're talking about good design here, and compromise at this stage is just unnecessary. Okay, so let's say you've got a garden that you're designing and there's a change in level that you've decided is going to be best dealt with through a set of steps. First, we need to establish how many steps. We take the level at the top of the steps and the level at the bottom. Now don't worry if these numbers don't make sense right now. They're from the site survey and represent the levels in relation to a datum point. But for now, just know that the difference in level is what we need. And for this example, it's 650mm. Start by dividing it into 3. It works, but it's a bit big at 217mm. So I tried dividing it into 4, which at 162mm is much better. However, now we need to remember that all hard landscaping requires the rainwater to be able to run off it. This is what we call the fall, and we need to account for this when designing any type of hard landscaping, but especially steps. This fall is the rate of the slope on your paving, your decking, whatever hard landscaping material it is, that allows that water to run off, stops it puddling, and therefore stops icing, potentially going green in the summer, and generally just stops the steps from becoming slippery and dangerous to use. Now, in order to work out the fall on our steps, first of all we need to know the total length or the distance of all the steps combined. So with 4 steps there are 3 treads, and using 2.5 times the riser for the treads, they're going to be 400 to 450 depending on material, so 3 times 400mm is 1.2 meters. Now your material and manufacturer specification will dictate the fall that you need to use. But for this example, let's assume it's 1 in 60, which is like your basic decking or riven paving slab, for example. So for every metre, this is approximately 17mm. Over 1.2 metres, that's 20mm. So if the total level change is 650, we need to take 20mm off this, giving 630mm, and divide this by 4 risers, which is 157mm. Now we're going to pause the maths lesson for just 1 second, because I think it's really important that we consider the actual practical considerations for this when it comes to any construction detailing. We need to think about how the landscaper is going to interpret this, and we've been very, very precise with our millimetre falls and steps. In reality, 157 millimeters, it's unlikely a landscaper is going to be able to follow that to the absolute millimeter on every single thing that they do. So sometimes I find it's better if we either round it up or round it down to the nearest 5 millimeters. The fall can account for that, and the landscapers will be able to deal with that on site. I don't think they're going to question a variation of 2 or 3 millimeters on the fall. Chances are that they'll have built the structure in a way they won't even be checking the fall. However, if they do, as I say, it's a fairly simple variation that they'll account for.
Okay, so these are your steps. Now just to recap, we took the variation in level, 650 millimeters. We divided it into 4 steps, worked out the size of the treads, that's the bit you stand on, which allowed us to work out the fall. We took that off the level change and adjusted the step height. And that's how we're going to work. Now, we need to draw how they're going to be built, and so we get onto the construction drawing.
So first, it depends on what the finished material is going to be. Usually it's going to be paving or decking, and the idea with both is fairly similar. You have your finished material and then you have your structure. Decking will always have the same. It'll be some sort of framework, whether it be composite or whether it be timber. Paving is a little bit more involved, and so that's what I'm going to look at now with you. I will add at this stage,
these are just a few ways in which steps can be built and might not be suitable for your site, and a professional should always be consulted to ensure the correct method is followed.
but back to what I specify 9 times out of 10.
As basic structures go, I'd normally suggest a concrete block or brick structure laid on a concrete footing of some sort depending on the existing land. This tends to do the job, and then you can backfill behind the structure and clad both the riser and the tread, or if you build the riser out of brick it might not need cladding depending on the aesthetic finish you want to achieve. As you can see from this drawing, I've noted the height of the steps and the tread size, 2 key bits of information that really matter, as well as a rate of fall, so it all adds up and the landscape doesn't get confused. And then I've suggested a structure without specifying the concrete depth, as in this case it will depend on the ground conditions. This is okay to do, but you should refer to this in your specification and put a minimum depth as so. And then you'll also note I've added a design detail on how I want the nose of the step to look with a 10mm overhang. Don't leave this to the landscaper. I've done this a couple of times and regretted it, as sometimes the nose is 30mm and looks way too big, and on one project the contractor thought it would be a bit more contemporary to have a flush finish with a Rivenstone, which looked absolutely dreadful. Now I know what you're thinking. Those treads, 600mm, the riser is only 140mm, so why is that not 2.5 times the riser as we talked about before? Well, in this case, I did bend the rules a little bit, and I think it's okay to do it when you're making the steps larger, because I wanted the steps to be really relaxed. There is a little bit of care needed here, that you don't want people to have to take a step and a half on the step. So for instance, if I'd made them 1.2 meters, for instance, it might have been a little bit awkward, but at 600mm, this is nice and comfortable all the same.
So when I was first looking to join the Society of Garden Designers, or the SGD, one of the things that they said to me was whenever I create a plan, whether it be a construction drawing or the master plan, I should design my gardens and present them in a way that would mean that if I were to give all the plans, the tender pack over to the landscaper, then go on holiday the same day, come back the day the garden's finished, I should find that the garden has been built exactly as I expected it, with no real surprises. Now that, if I'm honest, is a tall ask, because you've got to account for every potential variation and every potential question that they might have. But in reality, we should be designing our gardens in this way and really thinking carefully about what we're doing. Details like this are a perfect example. Others might include the grout joint, how they line up, whether the risers match the treads. Does the riser sit on top of the tread, or does it sit behind the tread, etc, etc. And I think this very much depends on what is important to you and to the design.
Here's another drawing that's very similar. You'll note the tread size, the riser height, nose detail, but this time not separately illustrated. The same sort of structure, but this time the concrete depth was noted, as I knew the ground conditions and I wanted to be specific for our guys building it. Now this one's slightly different. Same idea, the top 2 steps follow what we've done in the past couple of drawings, but the bottom step here was made from decking as it went on to a larger deck. You'll note I've put in the frame size and how it's been concreted into the ground, etc. Fairly simple stuff.
The only other element that you might want to consider when it comes to steps is the handrail. This can vary depending on the project. Commercial or public places definitely need a handrail. Residential situations sometimes depends a little bit on the height, how many steps there are. I tend to take this on a case-by-case basis, talking to the homeowner and just assessing what the site needs in order to be safe. There are a few other rules that you need to be aware of when it comes to working in the UK, and clearly building regulations should always be consulted whenever you're building any kind of stairs or steps in and out of a project. So we're going up a level now into the wonderful world of water. Now, before you can design any construction detail, you really need to understand how it's going to work. And with water features, there are specialist companies out there who can design your water features for you, specifying all types of filtration and the way that the water feature works. But for this video, we're going to keep it simple and we're going to look at a straightforward water blade.
These blades are available online and are really simple yet effective feature that's easy to maintain and creates noise, visual impact, and a feature that looks great when it's lit up. We'll talk more on lighting effects in another video very soon, so don't forget to subscribe if you think that might be of interest.
Now, the idea of these water blades is actually very simple. You need a body of water, a reservoir if you will. You're going to take a pump like one of these, which is going to then push the water out through some pipework like this, and it's going to go into a water blade like this. Now, these are manufactured. This one's a particularly big one. Often they tend to only finish there. For some reason, this one's got a huge overflow, but it just happened to be one I had. This is the pipework's going to go into this, fill up the reservoir, run off, and drop down like that. And it's going to drop into the reservoir, ready to be recycled yet again. Now, you need to make sure that your reservoir is big enough to take the amount of water that's going to be pushed through, and certainly deep enough that it's going to be able to hold the pump and it's going to stay underwater even when it's pushing that water through. But otherwise, it's fairly simple stuff.
So here you can see an example of one of these features we built last year. Now, the reservoir was made from blockwork and then fiberglass, but equally this could have been prefabricated reservoir or pond liner. The pipework goes out of the pool through the wall, but again it could just as easily have popped out the top and under the wall and then hidden by a plant. The blade is simply built into the blockwork wall. There's a bit more information on it here in terms of the depth, pump location, blade height, and the concrete structure for the reservoir. And this is the end result. Now, this particular type of setup can be used in a few different ways with a few different effects. This is another example of a water blade, sort of similar, but this time used with deck bridges over the reservoir. The setup is similar, but note both examples I tend to place the pump at the opposite end of the water reservoir to the blade, as this ensures a good flow of water and no chance of stagnant areas. Now, for the same feature, I've also produced a second construction drawing. This one is really about the decked bridges and structure, how they would suspend over the water and still be structurally sound. As well as this, I've had a chance to put in a few more details on the rest of the feature, and sometimes having more than one drawing can keep things simpler than trying to get all the information in on one page, which can potentially be a little bit confusing. Now, this is just one type of feature, but the basic idea is the same for a water wall, rill, globe type of feature, and any other stream or waterway that recycles the flow. So here's one last example of a similar type of feature, but this time put in as a slightly more complicated rill. This was a really big water feature. It had 5 of these spokes or rills, but the bit I want us to look at is the cross section where you can see exactly the same idea. A pump within a reservoir, recycling water down a pipe and back up into the rill. It was made a lot more complex through some of the aesthetics that I put in and a few other details added, but the idea is the same, and that's really what I want you to take away from this if you're new to it. And here's an image of the actual rill being constructed. This one was for the Cancer Research UK garden at RHS Tatton Flower Show, which won a gold medal. I'll just throw that bit in there. And this is the end result.
So earlier on, I promised you some resources and recommendations for references that I tend to use when designing water features and all sorts of construction detailing. So if you're still with me, as well as subscribing to this channel, here you go. This is a great reference. I use this all the time. Fairly reasonably priced, £25 I think I paid for this one. It's got loads of information on there on loading, ramps, lots of measurements and details that you're going to need when designing features within the UK. Pick this one up from a very well-known online retailer, but I'm sure it's available in a variety of bookshops and yeah, online, should you need it. Now, Paul Hensey is a fellow of the Society of Garden Designers and has written a book that's well worth getting.
Construction detailing for landscape and garden design. It's not quite as cheap at just over 50 quid when I look, but again, I think it is well worth the investment.
Finally, don't forget your suppliers.
If a company sell a product, then they should be able to advise you on it. London Stone have some great resources on their website, as do Landscape Plus and various other suppliers, but most should be able to help you.
There we go. I could go on for hours about construction and detailing, but I think you'd all have switched off or fallen asleep. So for now, if you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe. And please do let me know if this was useful or if there's anything in particular you want me to cover in the future. I'll do my very best, and that's it for today.